Welcome to BioIT World's Trends from the Trenches podcast, your insider's look at the science, technology, and executive trends driving the life sciences. I'm Allison Proffitt, editor of BioIT World. This episode is hosted by Stan Gloss, founder of BioTeam, a life sciences IT consulting company at the intersection of science, data, and technology. Joining Stan today is Bryn of Roche Information Solutions. Together, they discuss the motivation behind AI enthusiasm and what outcomes Roche hopes to see from AI and ML investment. Let's listen in.
Hey, good afternoon, Bryn. It's so nice to be with you in this beautiful day of August and that beautiful background that you have. I'd love to be hiking in those mountains.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, lovely to see you again. And I'm dialing in from Switzerland, and it's 35 degrees Celsius, bright sunshine, and as you say, wonderful mountain view.
That's fantastic. Well, this is a continuation of our previous podcast that we did a couple months ago. Towards the end of that podcast, you said, well, maybe next time we should talk about AI and machine learning. And now it's next time. So today I'd love to explore a little bit about AI and machine learning. And what I'd like to do is guide it through basically three questions. Why is Roche and why are you interested in pursuing in that? How is Roche doing it? And then what results or what outcomes are you hoping to see from these kinds of efforts? And I want to start with why, because I see in the marketplace many different organizations get enthralled with technologies, whether it's cloud or data lakes or even AI. And they're all immediately getting into the what, and never really understanding the why. So that's where I'd like to start today, and I'll let you go at it.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, wonderful place to start, and perfect, absolutely. I mean, ultimately, I guess for all of us working in the sort of healthcare life science space, we're trying to improve the well-being of humankind. So immediately coming to mind would be patients, people who are kind of in the healthcare system and struggling with their diseases, struggling with the costs and the burden of getting access to and paying for and experiencing healthcare. And then on the other side, there's the actual healthcare systems themselves, the providers, be they private or governmental, which are really creaking under the rising costs, burnout of staff, aging population challenges, and many other factors. So we have a huge unmet need out there in healthcare. And that's before we even think about the true aspiration for all of us, which is to think more about well care. So, trying to stay in that well state, as we were talking about earlier, rather than becoming patients. So early identification of risk factors, really preemptive or prophylactic kind of interventions that will prevent us from becoming sick or as sick. And so that's really that's the why we're here. Why I'm here doing my work as well. And for a company like Roche, and I'm sure this is true of many similar healthcare life science companies, our big picture, we say to do now what patients need next. And we've had a lot of discussions over recent years, how do we bring more and better solutions to patients, to healthcare systems at a substantially lower cost? And that can be a monetary cost, but there are other costs as well involved, things like access and convenience and these types of things. So that's the why, I think, the big picture. And I have not mentioned technology or AI once, but it's a great place to start.
So what about the why in your role at Roche?
Yeah, so my role being in the area of data analytics for our sort of digital healthcare business, our insights business, it's really part of that bigger picture. So we're trying to bring solutions to healthcare systems, to healthcare providers, to diagnostic labs, even to direct to patients that will alleviate in some way the costs of the healthcare system or will bring benefits. And for me, the ultimate benefit is a better outcome for a patient, and I think that the whole system is pushing towards that. And as I mentioned, the ideal would be even preventing someone from becoming a patient.
But you also serve internal clients as well. They have a why as well.
That's true, exactly. So we provide services and data and systems and tools to a lot of different scientists and technologists, product developers, and so on across the company. And from an internal perspective, I think about it in perhaps a sort of a continuum between the understanding and decision making. So really providing data and analytic tools to help people to understand, for example, mechanisms of disease, the way that healthcare systems work, the way patients experience care, and then being able to make appropriate decisions in the products we build, the services we provide, and ultimately progress, towards that vision that we discussed.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I hear that this product mindset that you're talking about, because you're really thinking about the stakeholders and the needs of the stakeholders, and then understanding that deeply, how do we then deliver that, right?
Absolutely, 100%. And we talk a lot, or we've talked a lot over many years in the pharma side of the business about target product profiles. So really understanding, who is this drug for? What benefit is it going to bring? How will it be delivered and experienced? What kind of side effects must we avoid for that particular patient population? Routes of administration, all of these things that give us a picture of what we're building towards, what we're inventing and developing. And that applies to almost everything we do internally and externally in the digital space as well. In the end, we're producing a product that could be a physical product, a diagnostic device. It could be really a software as a device, a product, a software, or it could be a service, which, maybe services are slightly different to products, but we also talk about solutions, which could be any combination of products and services. And I think target product profile applies there as well. And as we perhaps talk a bit more about AI, I think we have to start with the target product profile. What are we trying to achieve with this analytic approach? And many of the ways we might develop, train, tune, monitor, and manage those AIs or machine learning models will depend on that target product profile definition and the needs. Sorry, Stan, interrupting you there, but really thinking about customer centricity and whether that customer is a physician, is a patient, or is an internal scientist, really focused on their needs and the benefits they're going to receive.
So when you're focusing on the flow of data to feed AI, are you thinking of data as a product that feeds the AI work that you do as part of a continuum of managing your products, your data as a product, such that it feeds into AI and machine learning work?
Exactly, indeed we are. And I would say it's an emerging area. So we're actually just in the process of productizing quite a number of data domains. So one could, for example, in the diagnostic space, look at instrument data, either technical data from the instruments or even the results that the instruments develop. And we want to productize those to make them much easier to consume, to integrate, back to what we discussed in the last podcast, to really apply the FAIR data principles. And that's best done, or at least one effective way to do that is through a product mindset with data product creation.
Yeah, we actually got in a podcast that I did previously with Chris Gibson of Recursion Pharmaceutical. We got we really, they've leveraged that product mindset into feeding their phenomics platform and being able to, purpose-built data sets that the end customer had a specification for the data. The data has to look and feel and look like this to be able to run in the AI algorithms. So everything is backed up all the way. So maybe that's a good transition to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely.
How are you guys? How did you queue it up? What are you doing these days in terms of the how?
Yeah, it's a brilliant time because, as you know, since we spoke some months ago, so we're August 2023 now, and over the past 6 to 12 months, there's been this huge explosion of, particularly in the generative AI space, with the large language models creating such a storm And so I would say really things are changing across the corporation. And I'm sure that's true in many areas. In fact, I see it in many of my peers in different companies, which is, for a long time, we were a kind of this, little backwater, these guys doing kind of cool things with data and analytics, but happily kind of left a little bit in the background. And now it's main stage. The CEO, the corporate executives, various executive teams through our businesses are asking, suddenly, what can we do with generative AI or, with AI generally? And so it's actually giving us new opportunities and also new challenges because, there's a lot of hype, a lot of perhaps false expectations or expectations that are very difficult and expensive to realize. And so people need to understand that. But the whole journey with machine learning and AI for us started decades ago, of course, and typically in very specialized domains. So perhaps looking at things like imaging data for digital pathology, looking at oncology studies, perhaps. So clinical trials where we've taken a tumor biopsy and trying to understand what's going on in the biology of that tumor in terms of obviously the tumor cells, but also interaction with the environment. So, immune cells, blood vessels, and so on. So really quite specialized tasks. And things like, convolutional neural networks, were very well adapted for image analysis, as we know. So I think we've moved through a number of those specialized use cases. And we've seen those grow into things like time series data. So looking at things like digital biomarkers from patients, where we're monitoring how they perform in a clinical trial, how their movements perhaps are being improved in Parkinson's disease by treatments, that kind of thing. And then maybe looking in that case more at kind of recurrent neural networks with memory layers that allow us to process time series data. And now, moving beyond those really specialized use cases, this Gen AI push is really, the question is, can we take all of kind of the knowledge, as it were, of course, the public domain and all the internal knowledge of a company like ourselves and create some, really amazing foundational models, or perhaps fine-tune existing foundational models to answer a whole range of very general questions, and even potentially do some tasks even better than some of the specialized models of the past.
So I'm so glad that you're talking about generative AI, because I do actually have a few, questions about where it fits in our workforce and the impact of generative AI. Now, many predictions say that a certain percentage of jobs are going to be lost because of generative AI. How do you view that? Do you see it as a potential threat to some of your data scientists, or is it just something that's going to make you even ridiculously more efficient? So how do you view that?
It's a really great question. And I think the truth is it is going to change the nature of work and a number of roles and activities of roles. That's absolutely for sure. So if we take the example of a data scientist or even just a general software developer, it's pretty clear now that at the very least, leveraging sort of large language models can be an amazing tool, using the likes of a Copilot or something like that to support with coding, but also with testing. So automating code annotation, these kind of things, perhaps even looking at historical sort of monolithic code bases and sort of factorizing those or breaking them down into microservices. So I don't think that does away with the need for great software developers or data scientists, but it has the potential to make them ridiculously more productive, as I think you put it. But the nature of the work will change slightly, and what we value may over time change. So if we realize these tools actually are exceptional at coding, then our data scientists and software developers can focus on different aspects of product development, where perhaps we've been lacking in the past in terms of resources. So the good news for us is we have so many more product ideas than we can resource. So I don't think we're going to see significant redundancies in our space of sort of data analytics in any time soon. And other areas, of course, from other industries, people have talked about the creative arts, marketing, perhaps paralegals, communication specialists. And again, I suspect this is just going to be a tool, as many things have been in the past with technical innovation, that they can use to make themselves more productive.
Yeah, I kind of think of ChatGPT as back in the day when we transferred from using slide rulers over to calculators. We have that same switch over right now. People saying, "Oh, that's cheating," and now you're not doing this, and all of that. I've been playing around with it myself, and I think what it's done, and I've seen is it's a way of democratizing access to. I can't write code, but I was on a seminar from the chief digital officer, and they said the number one programming language now is evolving into English. Mm-hmm. So this ability for somebody like me, I just recently did a post in Medium on using ChatGPT as a Socratic teacher. So I was able to work with somebody and put together a prompt that, basically you can ask it anything and it will start firing away questions at you and work with you to, learn any topic that you want. So, it's a little scary, Bryn, when I start getting involved in technology. Ask anybody who knows me. I'm not the most technologically advanced person on the planet.
But you know how to use it. I mean, that's the key. I just think about what we're trying to achieve with sort of digital health in our space. And, the amount of time it takes us to bring a product to the market, particularly if it's something that has regulatory impact. So software as a medical device, perhaps for clinical decision support or automation of clinical workflows or something like that really needs to be very robust. Clearly, there's a lot of additional work required, even if you use generative AI as part of your augmented development process. But imagine then the ability to scale, for example, into different languages, to adapt perhaps models into new disease indications or for new populations. So I can really see potential of leveraging AI for scaling products. So that would be another area where, again, we can bring back to the vision or the mission that we discussed earlier, bringing significantly more products and better products at dramatically reduced cost. And that's another area where these, I think, generative AI approaches could be very helpful for us.
Stan and Bryn will take the plenary stage at BioIT World Europe this November in London. We'd love to have you be part of the conversation. First, what questions would you like to see Bryn answer? What topics would you like the two to discuss? Use the link in our show notes to submit your questions. And then make plans to join us in London. You can use code TFT10 for 10% off your registration.
Yeah, in my upcoming episode with Jean Caron from Bayer, we talked about the role of this with digital twins. And it was really interesting, her comment to me. She didn't want to go down the path of digital twins. She says, there's so much that AI and machine learning could do. And there's so much low-hanging fruit that you really, and things that we could do to make a patient's life better. That digital twins will happen in time, but it's not our focus. We're focused on the patient.
Yeah, absolutely. And if, in a way, and I know this is bending the definition a little bit of a digital twin, but if you take a very deep and high dimensional data set from either biological experiments or from clinical use cases, and you build a model from that, in a sense, you're creating a digital twin of whatever it is you're modeling. So that could be, for example, the way the heart behaves under certain conditions. It could be the way certain group of patients behave under treatment or moving through the healthcare system. So actually, even just by building models using any or potentially multiple types of modeling technology, including large language modeling, you are in a sense creating a part of a digital twin or a kind of digital twin. But this idea of building a digital twin of a whole entity, and we know it well from the buildings, where I think that's a rather easier task, although still challenging. But to build a virtual human kind of, it is very challenging. And in the end, your representation of that reality is only as good as the data that you're building the model from. And usually that's either incomplete, it's not got enough representation of the complexity of biology or human behavior in it to really make a highly usable twin. But there is another use for an approach that's a little bit like digital twins, and that's to take data sets that have a privacy sensitivity and to create a synthetic representation of those data. So all of the dimensionality of the data are captured, but all of the elements of the original that could potentially have privacy implications can be removed. So it's a form of privacy preserving technology, not dissimilar. Maybe we use anonymization, pseudonymization, or redaction in the past, but to create an entirely synthetic twin of a data set also is of potential use for privacy preservation.
Well, that's fantastic. Hadn't thought about it that way, but I really appreciate that perspective on the, that we do have the models are basically twins, if you think about it for a second. So I want to pivot over to what. So what is Roche doing with AI and machine learning, and what results or outcomes have you seen from the efforts that you're putting in?
Yeah, I should say, in a sense, where I think those of us in the business are very aware we're at the beginning of a very exciting journey. So in a sense, what we've done and what we're doing is just a fraction of what we imagine and hope to do in the coming years. I mentioned a few use cases, but maybe I step back and think about early research. One of the most important aspects of doing a new drug program, for example, is really understanding the biology of the disease and of the potential drug targets that you're likely to pursue with a new medicine. And so for a long time, we've been using things like natural language processing and the different forms of advanced analytics to help scientists to grapple with very large data sets, information sources like published literature, big historical banks of experimental data, clinical trial data, and so on. And when I think about the classic 4 types of analytics, so you've got the kind of descriptive approaches, which is just essentially dashboarding, search and query, sort of understanding what is there in the data, and then more diagnostic. So that question of why. So I observe something is happening in this biological system. Why is that happening? And trying to get some degree of explanation, mechanistic or otherwise, of what's happening. And then predictive. So looking at, since that's happening, what might happen if I make this intervention or that intervention. And then finally, prescriptive. So thinking about recommendations of what should be done in the future. So descriptive, diagnostic, predictive, and prescriptive. And I think all of those approaches we've used at various times. And now as I think about applying that into the healthcare setting, you immediately see the applications. So you can imagine descriptive, helping a physician just to bring together and grapple with the data around us, perhaps an individual patient or a group of patients, reporting, dashboarding, presenting the right data at the right time, diagnostic, what is happening with my patient, looking at imaging, looking at genetics, looking at clinical data, at bloods, at chemistry, and so on. Predictive, what's likely to happen to my patient, if I do nothing. And then perhaps prescriptive, what would the model, what would be the AI recommendation of what we should do with patients like this? And that links us into things like the clinical guidelines. So in most indications, in most countries, there is an established set of clinical guidelines so that physicians can be guided on the knowledge of, that's being gathered across the discipline. And refined over time. So, and also updated when new treatments come available or new discoveries are made. So if I have a patient with a certain type of cancer at a certain stage, perhaps with certain comorbidities or risk factors, I can look them up in the guidelines and see, okay, the next best step for my patient would be to order this diagnostic test. And then based on the result of that, perhaps apply certain types of treatment. But you can imagine for a physician where some of these guidelines are hundreds of pages, they're changing constantly with new discoveries and innovation. It's very difficult to keep on top. And that's where an AI model that really is ingesting these regularly and keeping up to date can make a great companion for that physician in augmenting decision making, making sure they don't miss things. Maybe testing, confirming or challenging their decisions and just saying, yes, you're proposing this. Have you thought about this? Why not that? These kind of interactions. So more like a virtual healthcare assistant or a decision support tool.
So that's interesting. You use the word augment, because realistically, a lot of what we think of as artificial intelligence is really augmented intelligence in terms of use.
Absolutely. Right? Yeah. When it's applied in most settings, it's going to involve a human somewhere in the loop, so there's this relationship between the AI, the artificial part of the intelligence, as it were, and the human part of the process. And therefore I often refer to it as AI as augmented intelligence as you say, in our application.
Exactly.
If not in the technology itself.
So back to the what tangible results or outcomes of your efforts could you share with us today?
Yeah, so I think back to the understanding of disease and disease progression, I think, particularly in the area of imaging, in areas like digital pathology, in retinal imaging, that's an area where Roche has been investing a lot and actually bringing some very interesting new options for patients with retinal diseases in recent years. And we've applied AI models. I almost hate to say the word AI. I'm thinking about really deep learning models, machine and deep learning models to the retinal images, and being able to answer questions like, what is the probability of this patient progressing with the condition and losing visual acuity to a certain level within a certain time frame? Even to the point, looking at mechanism, what is the likelihood that this patient responds to a certain mechanism of treatment or not, like anti VEGF and so on. And so that's been very powerful in guiding our sort of clinical work and some of the work. Now, what we'd love to do is bring those types of models, of course, to clinical practice, which is a whole nother barrier. I mentioned digital biomarkers. So using really deep learning models to classify the activities that patients are performing, climbing the stairs, walking, turning, and understanding how well they're performing those tasks in the presence or absence of experimental therapies, for example, in neurological conditions as an example there. Again, they've brought us great value and insight in the conduct of clinical trials and really helping us to progress new medicines. But we'd love to bring those to clinical practice. And that's actually something we're working on right now with my team, is leveraging the work of my former team in the pharma R&D world, and now really looking to bring those solutions to the clinical care setting and to other pharmaceutical and life science companies. So to all of that work we've invested in and that patients actually have invested in with us on clinical trials, we want to make that available to other pharma companies to help progress their development activities as well.
Wow, that's amazing. So I guess my final question, because we're running out of time, is what lessons learned, what were the things that you could share with our audience around getting going and getting value from AI and machine learning efforts?
Yeah, great question. I think maybe the first one to start with, it's all in the data. So no matter what approach you're using to model, whether you're using sort of more symbolic machine learning, where you've defined features or you've understood the features, full deep learning models, right through to sort of attention-based transformers like large language models, it's all about the data. So the model can only learn what's there. So high quality, high volumes of high quality, well curated data are absolutely key. And of course, we know that in every data set, there are biases. there are confounding factors caused by the way the data were either collected or produced in some way in the beginning. And those need to be understood and let's say, accounted for in the modeling and in the application of the models. So really understanding the limitations of the models or understanding the limitations of the data and therefore what's inherent carried into the model. So it's all in the data. I think the other biggie is to think about, back to the TPP, what exactly are we designing this thing to do? And that will inform us in the way we train, the way we tune the model. So, for example, is this a model that is signal seeking? So it's really looking to find a signal in maybe a more discovery oriented setting, or is this, and therefore we will tolerate quite a lot of false positives. Mm-hmm. Or is it a model rather that we're looking for much more stringency? For example, in a clinical setting where you're saying, this needs to be, really the predictive value needs to be very high, and we, for whatever reason in the model, we can or can't tolerate more or less false positives or negatives. So really understanding the application and the biases, as I said, in the model, and then to minimize the risks and the impact of those appropriately. So that would just be a few thoughts. There's so many more. Maybe that's the topic for the next one, is trustworthy AI, where we can think more about the applications, the ethics, and the implications of applying AI in different systems and what that means for the patients, perhaps, or other subjects that may be living in that system.
So again, Bryn, you're amazing segue. You and I are going to actually be at BioIT World Europe in London in November, where we're going to do a fireside chat, which is a live version of this podcast. So I'm going to absolutely bring that topic to the floor, and we will continue the conversation. Bryn, thank you so much for this great edition on AI, and really appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan. Really looking forward to seeing you in London. Take care.
Take care. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to BioIT World's Trends from the Trenches podcast.